Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Painless Universal Conversation with myself, Anne Welsh. Today we'll be talking about the critical subject, amplifying your voice. Have you been held back? Have you always wanted to say something and never had the confidence to say it? Probably because of your background, probably because of the way your parents have taught you not to use your voice, or probably just some circumstances. Probably you were bullied in school because of the way you did your presentation, and that left a really bitter taste in your mouth, and you've promised yourself never to go back at it again. My guest today used her pain to find her joy. Angeline Chi talks about amplifying yourself. Our conversation will be owning your voice and breaking through barriers. Let me tell you a little bit about who she is. She's a media communicator coach, keynote speaker, coach of You Amplified, host of The Power of the Only podcast, and an award-winning former TV news anchor and reporter. She leveraged her 20 years working in the media and speaking industry, her personal development work, and experienced coach in the corporate and entertainment world to help leaders to step up into the spotlight and find their voice, really to find you. Angela has worked in top TV markets from KCBS TV, KNBC in Los Angeles to Fox 6 and KNSD TV in San Diego. She's hosted shows for E! Entertainment, HGTV, that's the Home and Garden TV, and helped launch Entertainment Tonight China. She was a future media mentor expert in Lifetime, the Pop Game, and has appeared as an expert on a variety of local and national shows, including the Today Show. She's made an appearances in the film and TV world. Her speaking engagement did not just start easy. She'll be telling us about that journey, how she found her voice, coming from immigrant parents who had always been shy about speaking, that she utilized that pain to find her own joy. Meet my amazing guest, Angela Chi, as we share and talk about her own story and ways you can amplify your voice to find your own joy. Well, hello everyone again. Welcome to Painless Universal Conversation with myself, Anne Welsh. Today will be about amplifying your voice. Have you been in that room when you've been struggling to speak up, or have your parents ever always told you that this is not the right time for you to speak, and that has been something that's led you to believe that, and you've never felt comfortable speaking? Well, as I said in my introduction, my guest today, Angela Chi, will be telling you how she found her own voice, how she went from being slightly shy, because I wouldn't say she was very shy, I don't think so, being slightly shy to someone who's taken world stages, speak keynote events, and spoken at many, many events, to now helping executives help find their own voices. Meet my guest, Angela. How are you?
Oh, Anne, I'm great. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh no, I'm really honored to have you here because you are a media communication coach, you're a keynote speaker, you're a creator of You Amplified. And when I saw that name, You Amplified, I think that is just that stands out. But before we get into any of that bits of all your work, can you just tell us in simple words, who are you?
Who am I? I am a visionary, someone who wants to change the status quo, that uses all my resources and my experiences, good and bad, to put something out in the world that will create change. I'm a mother, I'm a speaker, but I really think that ultimately everything that grounds what I do, whether I'm speaking, coaching, is really that fundamental principle, is that I see things a certain way differently, and I want to create change that makes people better. Similar to you, how you want people to find joy. I think ultimately that's all what we want, right? Create change where people can live their best lives.
Yeah, and it's so difficult because a lot of people have been living this pandemic and got to that stage where they think, would I ever be able to find my best life? Or,
Yeah.
will it be in a corporation? Would I be able to find my joy? But when you look at your life, Angela, there's one
Yeah.
thing so fascinating about it. I think, at 15, right? I think before you went to fame as a 15-year-old, as you went as you were not a speaker yet. When you look at that little girl, 15 years old, what would you tell her today?
Yeah, I think you were talking about a moment where I started doing different competitions, right? When I was 15. I think that shy little girl really evolved. I think 15 was that turning point for me where I started to step into who I was. Whereas when I was younger, probably about 8, 9, 10, around that age, when I'm starting to discover myself, I grew up a shy Asian girl raised by immigrant parents. I grew up in the suburbs of Los Angeles. My parents immigrated from Taiwan in the 70s. And, they made a really good life, but they worked really hard. And there were moments where they lost their voices, right? Like any immigrant or any situation, sometimes you have to do what you need to do to fit in. And I think I saw that as they lost their voices in a sense, and they always taught me to not rock the boat, to play it safe. And it's not just about my Chinese culture being an immigrant. I think there's a lot of things in society for different communities, different for women, and you feel that. But I kind of evolved as I got into teenagehood, is like, no, I don't see that as a negative. So I had to evolve and into, it's actually my mission now, because seeing my parents struggle and not being able to step out of whatever constraints there were, whether it was the system or their situation, made me even more wanting to harness that power. So it was a gradual evolution, but I think for me, there was a pivotal moment, I think, when I started to step into myself, and it's evolved, right? When you take action and you step into yourself, it evolves more and more and more. But sometimes I wonder when I listen to podcasts and I listen to different people talk about how they struggle with finding their voice. I used to struggle with finding my voice, but I actually don't remember that moment where it just shifted. But I know now I never want people to feel that way, feel that they don't have the ability to show up, feel like they have the ability to share all of who they are. And I think it started from childhood of not being able to do that, and now wanting to help others own their power and their voice. So yes, that's how my childhood evolved.
But how did you overcome that pain, of finding your voice? Because I remember I was asked to give a presentation at school, and I refused to stand up. I said, they said my names many times. I ignored it, and I knew everyone was looking at me, and I just totally freezed out. Couldn't stand up. How did you find that voice in you, that you knew this is the right time to take the spotlight, to go out there? Because you look at your career, you've done so many things that involved your voice. How did you do it?
Well, I think, like I said, when I was younger, I didn't really know. I always was the one in the neighborhood that was like chasing people. I was behind. I remember I had a big wheel. Everyone else had a bike. My parents just didn't really understand. So I was always playing catch up. But I think when I got into 7th grade, my speech teacher said, you should enter the speech competition. And I'd never even thought about that. And it was the Optimist Club speech competition. I really think that was the first moment where I was like, well, how do you give a speech? What do you do? And, we just talked about, she'll think of a concept. Here's the theme, write something about it. And I think, like I said, taking action and doing it. I didn't know how to write a speech. I didn't know what I was doing. And I think I placed second, out of my school, which I didn't win the whole thing, but it kind of started planting that seed of like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then I entered again next year. And then I entered again next year. Right. And then that kind of opened up opportunities where I started doing student government and entering different things. I started seeing as a way to share my voice. So it doesn't have to be a speech competition, but I think for anyone that's struggling, there is a moment where it doesn't just happen. It's really about taking that action and having it work out, or maybe not having it work out and trying it again. Right. My confidence and my ability to do things didn't just happen. I really think it's a series of events of taking that risk, having it work out. And if it doesn't work out, what did I do afterwards to continue to do it? And it builds and it builds and it builds. Doesn't mean I don't get nervous. I still get nervous for large speaking engagements, but every time you step up to that next level, you start feeling that energy. And I like to call that nervousness that people call energy. It's actually a positive energy. It's the energy because you're about to do something big. You're about to do something that you have a message to share, right? When you're younger, you're like, oh no, push it down, push it down. But I actually have learned to harness that energy. But yeah, it's a gradual process and it's not the same for everyone. And it doesn't always come at the same time, but taking that first step makes a big difference.
I agree. I mean, if everyone could just be bold enough and just say, you might mess up the first time, it's fine, but it's something that mess up will make you go home and realize where did start thinking, where did I make that mistake? What else do I need to improve on? You have a 20 years working in the media and the speaking industry. Your personal development work and experience, you work with lots of corporate, coaching them, executive, telling them, okay, guys, you guys are doing your job, but there's a way you could really amplify your voice. How would you teach people that believe they've got it? That, because they always, to be an executive, I always believe that you are at that level. But sometimes there's always something missing. How do you teach these very senior guys to learn to amplify their voice even better?
Got it. So you're talking about people who already feel like, I got it all, I'm good. I'm
Yes.
good. I don't need any coaching.
Yes.
I'll tell you this story. So I was working with a large financial company on the East Coast, and I went in for coaching sessions with a different group of executives, and most very high level, but some were, really receptive to coaching and some weren't. Some came in, it's like, oh, well, I heard you're really good, so I'll come in, but I don't think we need the time. I think I got it under control. So everyone was doing a presentation. So people came in for about an hour and a half, at least, just to kind of go over. I have a U-Amplified process that I take people through that's usually longer than an hour and a half, but with large groups, we can kind of, they were getting ready for a large presentation for their whole industry, right? So different people. And I remember them walking in and, you need to coach people where they're at. Some people don't see their blind spots, and they may have it all together. The speech may be fine, but how do I make them more connected? How do I make them appeal to the audience? So that's what happened, is that, yes, he was fine as a speaker, but he wasn't thinking about the audience. He was thinking about himself, that I'm a good speaker. I've done this before. I know what I'm doing. So I remember he was a senior level person. He brought in two of his colleagues. He was going to give a presentation, and two others. And I remember not like saying, oh, you need this. It was more like, okay, why don't you just come in the room? Let's just see what happens and let's just talk. And what happened is, by the time they left the room, is that they realized that there were gaps. But I came from their perspective. So the gap is that he wasn't talking to the audience. He wasn't looking at his end result. So I didn't have to change who he was, but I actually needed to make him more connected. People who come from a high level, sometimes it's not that they're not charismatic. It's not that they don't know how to speak, but they're actually missing the connection because they think they're overqualified. Does that make sense? There's always more that we can bring out, right? If it's not, some people have a low voice or they're really boring. You have to bring up their energy. Some people are super confident. They're actually really good. And for people who are just, I watch them and I'm like, you're fine the way you are. I wouldn't want to change anything. But now let's start thinking about, what is your actual message? How do you want to connect with that person? What does the audience want? And sometimes they save what the audience wants till the very end, right? They'll give all these facts and figures. I'll do this presentation. And at the very end, they'll go, and this is how you do this, this, and this, and we'll help you save this, this, and this. Mm-hmm. So then it might be more technique. It'd be like, everything's great. Why don't you bring what the audience wants to the top, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's about, they're not very good at telling their story. Everything's very, they got their stats, they got their figures, they got their point, but they're not vulnerable or they don't have any connection. And for those people some people aren't even ready for the presentation itself, then let's just get them with a small intro, get them ready and out there with their energy. But some people, I have another high level executive that I work with. He's great all around, everything good, right? Voice is good, charismatic, people like him, but he had a really, really important story about his childhood, that he worked in like affordable housing, and he never shared the part where he helps people get homes, and he's high level in like policy making and all this. He didn't share the fact that when he was younger, his parents couldn't afford a home. He was an immigrant, and the whole story tied into exactly what he was doing. So then I also help people bring in their life experience to connect with the audience. So I don't know if that answered your question, but there's an evolution of where you reach people. And so for those three guys that came in, I kind of met them where they were at and focused on the areas that they could improve. Not that they were just doing anything wrong, and not downplaying, oh, you need me. No, you don't need me. But if you had some guidance or some feedback, maybe you could get even better than you are. And so they left very happy, and they stayed the whole time, and they're like, okay, thank you, that was great.
Oh, I see how you can make that work, because a lot of people are at that level and they just never believe that there's something that needs to be changed. And so most of the time, unless you get someone like yourself, Angelique, it's very, very, very difficult for someone to understand that this needs to be changed or that needs to be reviewed. But you also, yeah, you also.
I just want to say, oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I want to say one more thing about the change. It's not about change, right? People think that, oh, just tell me what I need to do. Do I put my hands this way? Do I do this? Do I stand this way? Yes, those are very subtle changes. That could happen in 10 minutes. I can critique that or whatever. I'm not here to critique you. I'm here to bring out the best in you. And bringing out the best in someone is different for each person. And sometimes it takes a lot more than just tips. So they start with tips and tricks, how to put the camera, the lighting, how to sit properly, maybe what to wear, maybe some inflections. Those things I can do too, getting people ready for a media interview, where to look. But then the deeper work comes with, who are you, what do you stand for, and how do you want to show up in the world? And that is that deeper level work that everyone can do and continue to do, right? I do it, and then every 3-4 years, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of a different person. I've evolved. I need to re-examine that for myself. What are the stories that I'm telling myself? What are the stories that I tell about other people? Just because I reached a certain level doesn't mean I stop growing. So there's always a place to go, even for really high level people.
Yes. Look at your line of work. Your line of work is truly fascinating. You have been a journalist. You've worked with major public broadcasting house. And what I always find with journalists is that they are prepared. They're prepared for, if I say 1, 2, 3, go, you know what to do. What are some of the challenges you found doing the jobs you previously did before you got onto what you're doing now?
Yeah. Well, as a journalist, ever since I was little, I wanted to be like Connie Chung, right? So I was that shy Asian girl. Connie Chung was a very prominent journalist in the US. She was one of the first Asian American newscasters, the only Asian woman I saw on TV. And she went on to become the co-anchor of the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather, which was a big deal back then. And so I was 8 years old and I'd watch her and I was like, I want to be on TV. I want to be like her. And I didn't really know why. It wasn't about being famous. I think I saw that as an opportunity. Representation is really important, but to have a voice and to share more. And so I was saying, the journey that I went on journalism, I guess, to get to your core question, you're saying, what are some of the rough spots that I hit or the difficult moments in journalism? Yeah. I went into journalism to have a voice, not necessarily to be famous or be on TV. And it was amazing in the beginning. It was hard working in the small markets. I mean, it was hard. I was working at Paramount Pictures. I was an assistant. I was making really good money because I wanted to learn all about the entertainment industry. I learned about TV and film. I helped launch Entertainment Tonight China. But in order to be a journalist, I also studied communication, and I went to UCLA extension program at night. But back then, there was no iPhones. There was no cameras. You would have to build your reel. So the beginning days were really, really rough. I had to, while I was working 5 days a week, I made my reel. I had to intern and get people to shoot me on video to send it to the stations. Finally got my first job in Palm Springs, which is about 2 hours away from Los Angeles. So I drove every weekend, over to 3 hours, every weekend, because I got a weekend job, working my way up, paying my dues, learning how to write, learning how to do on the job, right? Not studying. And I think so in the beginning, it was the barrier to entry that was difficult, but those were the early years, which were great because you had the opportunity to tell these great stories because you were at these small stations making no money, but you could tell, you're like, I want to investigate that story, or I want to talk about the Chinese history of Bakersfield, or I want to talk about that. And they were open to it. As I moved up the ranks, which was great, I got back to my hometown of Los Angeles. I skipped ahead several years of hardship, but working early mornings, learning the craft, learning how to be a reporter. It's not about being famous. It's not about being on TV, although on camera is important. It's learning about how to write, how to interview, how to listen, how to, be aware, how to see all sides. But getting back to Los Angeles was my ultimate goal. But when I was in Los Angeles, it can be really hard and competitive because as it's evolved now, is that it was this constant story, like car crashes and this and that, and kind of the journalism kind of lost, you weren't able to do the deep stories anymore, especially on special occasions with sweeps and different things I was able to. So journalism was hard. It's hard to enter. So for all those journalists out there right now, I totally commend them, people who have stayed in the industry, who have always tried to listen, be fair, get the stories out there that matter. Most journalists, that is what drives them, is that they want to share their other people's stories and their voices. And these days, the media has shifted a bit. So there's a lot of demands in terms of there's too much information, not enough time. And so people that are journalists now really need to stay true to their core. And if there's young people coming up, really going, why are you doing this? It's not about fame. For journalists is different than being an Instagram influencer. It's still both on camera, being a broadcast journalist, but really, why are you doing it? But to get back to your question about the hardship, is that it was hard to get to where I was, but it was worth it. And when I got to my ultimate goal, which is the #2 market in the US, which was Los Angeles, I worked really hard, but there's a lot of demands on the media companies for ratings and to make money and time and all that. And so I feel like the quality of story, sometimes the journalists don't have the opportunity to dive deeper into. And so that's why I love now with social media for good. I mean, I have a platform with The Power of the Only, my podcast. I can tell all the stories I want as long as I want. And it's really the same. I'm not a journalist anymore, so I do have more opinions these days, but it's the core is in me. I always try to see both sides. I do my research, I interview, and I try to tell a story that moves people. And that was my ultimate goal as a journalist.
I love that because I hear so many people, and there's so many newspaper out here now, and they write stories, and you say you started a story. What is the end? And a lot of people are now confused. What is the real story? And with what you do, which is the Power of the Only podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about what impact that podcast is making, and why you started this podcast? I know you started talking about it, but this is something I looked at your podcast. I love your work. I love the people you interview because of the message they come out with was so beautiful. But I'd rather it come from you. What is the meaning of the Power of the Only podcast?
Yeah. Thank you so much. So the Power of the Only came to me when, my whole life growing up, I was always the only Asian girl in my neighborhood growing up. Right. I hear that sound where it resonates with you. The only Asian reporter at certain stations in a small market, the only woman speaker at many events. But I found power in that. There was a study that came out in McKinsey several years ago about the Women in the Workforce report that says onlys, they feel left out, their voices are drowned out, they don't have as much power, they're burning out and they're leaving the industry. While I know that can be true because it can be really hard and difficult being the only sometimes, but I've always felt that there's power in that. And so I wanted to change the narrative of, yes, can be difficult, but I've always found power in being the only. And so I have 5 principles of the Power of the Only of how we can achieve success, but I wanted to kind of discover and see what are the other people's, how did they reach their level of success when they are the onlys? People trying to break through barriers, do something different, see things differently, do things differently, and they may feel like they're all alone. So the only started in corporate as the onlys, meaning women, like the only women in the room. But I believe onlys is an energy. It is a thought process of someone who feels like they see things differently and they want to step up. And how do they step up to create that change when everyone around them only wants to do the status quo? And so I see you as an only. And then when I see people who are creating change, positive change, and trying to break through the old barriers, I go, oh, I want to hear their story. And so the Power of the Only is really, sometimes it's individual podcast solo episodes where I talk about power, presence, and representation. How do you own your voice? How do you own your power? How do you step up as an only? How do you show up and own your power and your voice in a more powerful way? But the interviews I do are usually people of all different, men, women, corporate speakers, entrepreneurs, but how did they harness their power of the only? Right? Where did their only come from? For some people, it's from, when did they shift from childhood? How did they navigate when they were the only, and how did they reach that level of success? So together, I want to create a community of onlys, of people who are breaking barriers, defying the odds, and creating positive change. And by listening to other people's stories, I hope that we can create a collective way. So I wanted to test my theories. Are these the 5 principles of the Power of the Only? And just gathering stories of people that are doing the same thing. So it's been a wonderful, wonderful journey. I started last March. Yeah, so it's been more than a year.
How would I know when I'm ready to amplify my voice? Because you said you do this. Is this a podcast you amplified? And is that you amplified? And what is that bit? Because it's not the podcast section, but you amplified sounds really good because it's like pointing at you, amplifying,
Yes.
telling you you're ready. How does anyone know when they're ready to get their voice amplified in a room? This lady, we're having this conversation today. Let's think about this young lady in a meeting room, filled with men,
Yes.
first meeting, and she was hired there because she got, best grade at university. She deserves to be there. She's so scared because it's her first job, board meeting, and she has to make a presentation to her board. How will she know when will she know that she's ready to
Yes.
to speak up, to make her
To
voice?
speak up. Well, let me start a little bit with what You Amplified is, and then I'll give you some techniques of if you're stuck in that room, like what you can actually do. So You Amplified really came out, like, I love how you noticed that, right? It's You Amplified. I'm a media and communication coach. I'm not here to change who you are. I'm here to help you amplify the parts of you, right? People say, I want to be like you. I want to be like Anne. She looks so elegant, sitting in her studio. I want to be like her. I want to have a show like hers. And I said, well, that's great. But what about you? So it's a deep dive into who are you? What do you stand for? How do you want to show up? And how does that impact you, right? Breaking through your barriers. For me, it's because my parents were Chinese immigrants and they told me to stay small and I had to break through those things. But how do I want to show up? And so You Amplified is really about owning all of yourself and stepping into that ability. And so in order to harness the power of the only, you have to be You Amplified. So You Amplified is my coaching and my training programs where I help people show up better, own their voice and their power. And people come because they want to give a speech. People come because they want to be on, they have a radio or a TV interview coming up, or they want to make videos. But ultimately, it's the work of how do you bring out more of you, and that process of peeling back all those layers. And for that individual in the room, let's say, that it goes back to preparation is important, but I'm sure for that individual, she prepared, you have your notes, you know what you're saying, but you're nervous because you're in a room because you feel like the only one. And that maybe you feel a little imposter syndrome. I don't even really like that word, but I think what I want to help people own is like taking a look back is like, who am I? What do I stand for? And how do I want to show up? When you know those things, you're able to own all of you. Like you already have everything you need to succeed. Right? You don't need to change who you are. You already have it, right? You've gotten that room for a reason, and to own that piece. I think that's what's missing. People forget you're in that room for a reason, and to step into it, owning that piece. Obviously, you still need to prepare, but when you get there, there's a difference between people doubting themselves and actually stepping into it, right? And then stepping into it, like we talked about that feeling, how when you get that nervous energy, people's like, oh, I'm not ready because I have all this nervous energy. Everyone else is so calm and I'm shaking. But that is the energy that you need to harness that, going, yes, first of all, take up space. You belong there. Otherwise, you wouldn't be there. Number two, yes, be prepared. So do what you can in terms of the content or whatever. But once you have that part, the rest is all up here, right? The rest is the mindset, is that feeling. How do you change that energy from a negative to a positive? You need that energy to show up. It's not a bad thing that you need to push down. It's natural, right? You're generating the energy to show up. And then when you get into that room, it's like, no, everyone's really the same. I've interviewed so many executives, men and women, and many people struggle with the same things. Even if you're different age, they're more experienced. They may not have the expertise in the area that you have. That's why you're in that room. They may run the company, but they need your voice. And so when you see your message as a way to contribute, it's not really about you anymore. You are in that room because you have the expertise and you are there to contribute and to serve that audience. And if that audience is higher level than you, they don't know what you know. Maybe they don't know the individual things that's happening on a certain basis. You have what they need. And by you owning that and showing up is how you can really own that room.
I like that. They need you there. So just have that in mind. They need you there. You're here for a purpose. You're not, no one, it wasn't that someone is doing your baby. They need you there. You need to own it and speak up. You are there. So speak up. Yeah. And a lot of people really struggle with that. And this is why I think the work you're doing is really helpful, because especially times like this, younger people going into the workforce, people currently in the workforce, not looking for promotion, never knowing how to ask for the promotion because they don't know how to utilize their voice, and not realizing the voice is very important. Like, I mean, you must admit that voice is one of the ways because it comes to a point, I think you can only be silent for so long when you
Yeah.
need a promotion. You need to get to that point where you need to start making that decision. What next, and how do I communicate that? So someone who's looking for a promotion, what kind of messages do you ask them? What kind of teachings would you say to the person to help them in that communication of looking for a raise, to get their voice heard, that this is something
Yeah.
they deserve? What kind of teachings would you say?
Well, it's hard depending on, right, what level, what situation, what industry, but ultimately, whenever you're asking for something or somebody to notice you, you really got to think, what's the value to the audience? So it goes back to one of my principles. I have 7 steps to confidence, clarity, and connection. And so it's the first step that I teach my speakers. And anytime you want to do any type of communication and connect, what does your audience want? Right. So let's say if your goal is a promotion, whether it's trying to present this presentation or, sell something online or whatever it is, but if it's for a promotion, really all that matters is, what does the audience want? How are you going to benefit them? What have you provided the company? And so before asking for a promotion, it's not always just about speaking up. It's about putting yourself in the other person's shoes, putting yourself in the company's shoes or your supervisors, and thinking about, what does the audience want? How can I serve them? And if you can figure out how you can serve them, or maybe you've been serving them, so then it's about you collecting all the information of, these are the ways that I've met the ultimate goals for you, that I've met the ultimate goals for the company. And then the promotion is secondary, right? That is just like a way of, when you really know what someone wants. So it's the same thing when you're a speaker. When you walk into a room, I speak to a room, maybe the same topic, but I connect differently if they're entrepreneurs, if they're all, male CEOs, if they're a group of teenage girls, maybe the same topic, but what do they want, right? So when you're going in for the promotion, it's really about taking a look back at all the things that you've provided. So that's confidence for yourself, meaning make a list. Why do you deserve this promotion? What are the things that you've done? How have you grown? How have you contributed to the company? How have you contributed to the team? That's good for you to know individually, even if you don't share all those things, just to say, yeah, I did all this, right? For celebratory, for that energy, for the confidence for yourself to ask for that raise. But it also serves as, individual examples of things that you can talk about from their perspective of what they need. And then the promotion, hopefully, will happen, but always you have all the different restraints, right? What about budgets or systems? But I think if you do that, anytime you're asking for something, if you come from the audience's perspective and you also showcase what you've done, I think that is exactly what you need.
Yeah. I love this, one of your core values on your website. And you said one of your core value is joy. Focusing on things that matter the most. Why is it important that we focus on things that matters the most in our lives?
Yeah. Time goes so fast, doesn't it? It's like, it just is like a blur sometimes. And it's really only those moments that freeze in time that matter. Oh, you're going to make me emotional. And I really do believe that. I believe joy is so important. I've had a wonderful career, but if you look back on the moments, I was just like, when you're asking me a story, I kind of skipped through all of them. And then there'll be a moment. It doesn't mean the moment you won an award or whatever. It's the moments, just a magical moment. Actually, my recent podcast was about commitment. And I went to my first concert, my open air concert in a year, 2 years, 3 years. We haven't been around people. And I just was I was only in 2 hours. And I was like, I'm really happy right now. Right. And everyone there was happy. And those are the magical moments. For me, it was that moment, being with my friends, being connected to people, listening to live music was a magical moment. For me, it's when, I left the news business and I reinvented myself because I wanted to build a business that allowed me to tell stories and to raise 2 wonderful children and to have the space and opportunity to create something bigger than myself, that I wasn't just telling stories or writing newspaper articles and things like that. And so the things that matter the most, it's really important, because in the end, what is it all for? It always comes back to that, right? I work with so many high-level executives. They work and they work and they work and they get to that top level. A lot of times my talks are about, what is fulfillment? So show up, right? Own your power, own your voice, get to the top. But maybe your goal isn't to get to the top, right? Maybe the goal is just to be the best of you at whichever level you are at, or maybe right where you're at. right? Creating what matters the most. So yes, ultimately, I always try to remind myself, because I still have that type A, go getter. It's been a process of unpeeling everything. If you would have said this to me in my 20s, I was like, nope, I'm going to be a TV news anchor in Los Angeles. You're not stopping me. I'm going to work, I worked 7 days a week. I interned, I went out, but I loved it. That was the stage of life I was in. Go. If that's the stage of life, to me, what mattered the most right then was me to prove myself after I'd done all that education to get to that top spot. And then as you grow and evolve, what's your next journey? My next journey was to build something bigger than that. It wasn't about me anymore, right? And then for those that are parents, that's what a major shift happens. It's not about you anymore. What matters to you the most? And so really taking a look at who are you? What do you stand for? How do you want to show up in the world? But ultimately, if we want fulfillment, what are the things that matter the most? And to cultivate that in a big vision of your life, maybe in a long-term plan, but also to cultivate it every day. There's many times where I'd say I burnt out maybe 7 years ago, where I wouldn't have taken a break. I was like blogging and learning social media and building my company and doing all these things. I wouldn't have taken a break to go get a massage. No. I wouldn't have just like, no, I was driven, and I came from this news, competitive industries of entertainment and news. You don't take a break. You don't take care of yourself. And then now, I work really hard and I serve, but I serve in a bigger level. And I go, you know what, this is what I need right now. What matters the most. And so after I went to that concert, I decided that what matters the most. My daughter said, I wish I would have been able to go with you. Can you take me, Mom? And she's 11, 12. And I go, well, let me find another one that's appropriate for you. And she was really sad that she didn't get to go to that concert. So the next day I was scouring, what's an outdoor concert that's still safe, that, a lot of people aren't touring. And if they are, some of them are indoors or they're not coming till like 2022. And I found one. And we're going this weekend, and it had all these great people, and it's in Los Angeles. We're going to drive there, but that mattered the most. I was like, how can I cultivate more moments that bring me joy? And my work brings me joy, but ultimately it's the moment where I got to go to that concert and go, wow, people are really happy and enjoying themselves. And then the next moment is my daughter having that opportunity. They're going to be teenagers, like prime time, where they don't want to go to a concert with me. So I I was like, oh, you want to go? Okay, let's go to one that's appropriate for you, and let's find one. So I'm glad I found one.
I'm glad you've been taking her, because that you're one of the core values being joy, especially in times like this. It's just amazing that you chose that as one of your core values. So I'm so happy. But my final question before I let you go is, I saw this in your website. I think you did a podcast on it. How can we break through barriers and harness the power of diversity? I love that you talked about that, and I'm being honest, I can listen to that particular conversation, because you're talking about harnessing something which is something people sometimes see as a problem, diversity. Yes. But rather than you seeing it as a problem, you saw it as an opportunity. How can other people take advantage of? How can we break through barriers that we're all facing every day in this world and harness our diversity?
Yeah, and that's what the power of the only is all about, right? Where, me being different can be seen as like, oh, that's going to hold me back. And sometimes, and structurally, sometimes it has, right? It can be more difficult depending on the organization or the system that you're in or the culture. But ultimately, I've always, one of the power of the only principles is see being the only as an opportunity and not a burden, right? Own your power, see as an opportunity and not a burden. I know it's taken time to grow into myself, but I don't have a problem speaking up for myself. When I was in those news meetings, doesn't mean I'd always change everything, but if they said something that was not inappropriate, maybe they covered a story like, go do this. And I go, well, that's not how it should be. And my diversity is an asset. Now you're seeing it, people, but I've always seen it this way. But, when I was on a TV studio, when people write scripts, there needs to be diversity in that writer's room. There needs to be diversity in the editorial offices of journalism, places where it's how do you harness that power? And so now I'm talking to the higher level individuals that run the companies, harnessing the power of diversity, not as an implementation, not to sound politically correct, not because that's what everyone's doing and we need to do an initiative, but actually seeing the power of the only in yourself, but actually seeing the power of the onlys as an asset. It is not a negative, right? So first of all, individually, we need to step up into our own diversity. I am completely Southern California and very Chinese. Right. When I was younger, maybe I was a little shy about my food. When I was younger, I would hide it, or my culture, or, my mom had a Buddha in the front yard. We're not even Buddha. And I used to hide it in the backyard because I didn't want people to see it. That's me when I was younger. I own all parts of myself, but it takes time and evolution. So yes, harnessing the power of diversity. I speak Mandarin Chinese. But I'm also very Southern Californian, right? So I own both pieces of that. So I'm very American and I'm very Chinese, and not to shy away with it, that it can be an asset. And I think for people running companies and seeing diversity is that it is a superpower, because it allows you to see things differently that you can't see. Doing things the way they've always been done doesn't really work anymore right now. We need to create something different and new, and harnessing the power of the only in yourself. But that talk that you saw as one of my keynotes was also, how can we harness the power of diversity for everyone, right? So as it's seen as an asset, and that comes from the other individuals that are empowered to see, yeah, actually, I do want to harness the power of diversity, not implement it, not put it in or stereotype it or token it. It really is an asset, and to actually change the mindset about that. But it starts within ourselves, of seeing it as an asset for ourselves.
Well, it starts with you, because you've just done this magical thing for us, all of us. I mean, for myself, being a Black woman, you've made it, giving us that voice that, rather than seeing it as a disadvantage or seeing it as a problem, find it as you find your spot and use that as an opportunity. And I'm really grateful for this conversation, because it really has taught me so much about amplifying our voices and not being shy, and knowing how to also, you've also taught us knowing when to speak as well, because that's also that key line, because a lot of people find it, okay, they speak and they speak too much, but there's also knowing when to speak and how to say things. This is something I love about your message as well, because you've seen it. And the key thing is the parents, your parents telling you from younger days, they've been very shy, and you said, this is not going to be me. Any final words from your end?
Yeah. And I actually do want to add one more thing, without it being too like, positivity, just speak up and everything will change. I want to be honest about it. There are situations where you may want to create change and you own your power of the only, and it doesn't work, because whatever situation you're in or environment you're in, it's not ready to change yet. Doesn't mean you didn't make an impact. But you also need, part of owning your power and owning your voice is honoring your own boundaries of when you have done the things that that you amplified, you've owned your power of the only. And sometimes the world isn't ready yet, and that's okay. And to know your boundaries, going, it's not this positivity of like, just speak up and it will be better and you're going to take care. Sometimes it may not work out, but what your boundary is. Like you said, when is it appropriate to speak? When is it worth my energy?
That's
right. There's times when it is not worth the energy to own your voice and your power. What is the ultimate goal? Right. So that is what we need to think about. What is your ultimate goal to create this change? What is the ultimate goal of your talk? What is the ultimate goal of this conversation? And if it's going to burn you out and you don't honor your boundaries, that's not owning your power and your voice. So owning your power and your voice is knowing all those things, but also honoring your boundaries. So I want to make sure that we don't leave the audience with this positivity where it's impossible to meet up to, that your own boundaries. But going back to my parents, it really, I was thinking about that the other day. I was listening to someone speak who was another Asian American woman, and how she was saying that her parents never taught her how to speak up. Right. And that it stopped her whole life. I have a different experience. My parents never taught me how to speak up, but that emboldened me even more to go, no, like I will not take this. This is not, no one should ever. And my parents didn't get, major stuff. We all got a little racism. I got called names when I was younger, random microaggressions. All of us have faced different things at different times. But I just mean in general, that feeling of being less than. Right. Everyone's had that feeling of being less than, whether you're Asian, Black, or, maybe too short or too this or too whatever. Yeah. And I think that for me, it didn't make me sad. It made me sad, but it wasn't like, oh, they didn't teach me, so I didn't know how to do it. For me, it was different. It made me even stronger to go like, no, I don't want anyone to feel this way. Everyone should own their voice and their power and figure out a way how to just show up And it made me even stronger. And so I think that's what's really driving me in my work. Yes, I help people with video and media and speaking, but ultimately, I don't ever want anyone to feel less than.
This is so amazing. Thank you so much, Angela-Chi, for helping us amplify our voices. I hope anyone watching, will be able to watch this and find their own voice wherever it's hidden. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.